All right, here we are. We're at your ranked choice voting candidate and campaign training. We're going to dive right in, and I'm going to have Maria kind of take you through some of the ground rules for today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Maria Perez. I'm Grace's partner at Democracy Rising, and I'm happy to be here with you today. Some basic ground rules and expectations for the training today and tomorrow. Today, we will be acknowledging that adults learn in different ways. Some people are more visual learners. Some people like to listen to stuff. Some people need to do things to learn. So we're going to try to mix it up a little bit. We're going to tell you things, tell you information. We're going to show you some visual aid to accompany that information. And we're also going to ask you that you engage in some hands-on exercises that will be peppered throughout the training. So hopefully, there'll be a mix of ways in which you'll be getting information that's going to work for everybody here today. As far as expectations, today we are asking you to be open and reflective. This may be new information for some of you. Some of you may have already some experience with ranked choice voting. It's a different way of doing things, right? It's a different way of doing elections. It's a different way of planning a campaign. So please just, be open to the information. Think about, okay, how might this change the way that I do things and the way that I have done things in the past? Build relationships. There's about 40 people here in the room today. There's probably some people some people you don't know. There'll be opportunity for you to do some hands-on exercises with people that maybe you don't know. Always a great thing to build relationships with folks who are sort of experiencing a similar life experience as you are now, which is campaigning. Very important. We're going to deal in today and not in tomorrow and not in yesterday, right? We are aware that ranked choice voting is super amazing policy for some people. Some people really don't like ranked choice voting. That is totally fine. You can have whatever opinion you have of ranked choice voting, but we're not really here to discuss the policy. We're not here to discuss the merits of ranked choice voting. We really are here to provide you with excellent, tested and proven best practices as to how to run a ranked choice voting campaign in a way that you can really maximize your resources and, get to that winning threshold that Jean was talking about. We are here to learn, right? We're here to learn from one another. We're here to learn together. So we're asking for everybody to be really respectful of everybody's times, of everybody's opinions, of everybody's stances. We will really have a zero tolerance policy around disruptions, right? If your cat walks across the screen, or if you need to turn off your video for a while to do something else, that's perfectly fine, but absolutely no offensive language or comments will be tolerated. We will mute people if needed, and if it continues, we will remove people from the training. So please just be kind, be cool with one another, and we'll have a great training today. Other than that, if you need to take a bio break at any point, if you need to get some water, just go ahead and do what you need to do.
All right, so I'm going to give you a little rundown of what we're going to cover in this training, right? So we have 2 sessions, and the goal that we had when we arranged these sessions was to make sure if you could only make one of them, that you got enough information, right? And fortunately, we are recording, so if there is somebody who needs a little bit more information, there may be ways that you can reach out and say, hey, I missed this session, I'd like to get that recording from Fair Vote Minnesota, and you can work with them. So here we are, we're in the first session, session 1. We are doing an amazing job of the welcome. I would like to just point out that the moment Maria said that, cats walking across the screen or anything like that wouldn't be an issue, I think I saw a cat walk right across the screen. So they're listening to, the cats are ready for this training. So after this, we're going to go into a little bit of an RCV 101. I know that there may be a lot of different levels of familiarity with the system throughout this training. You know, there's some cities that just passed ranked choice voting. There's some that have been using it for a while. So we're going to kind of take it down to the ground level. You know, I've been doing trainings like this for almost a decade now, and I still like to go through a 101 because one, I like to learn from other people when they talk about this. I always gain something from that. And two, it's always good to have a refresher. These are things that we can always be brushing up on. And especially if you haven't been in a campaign cycle in a while, it's good to get a refresher with that. Then we're going to go into 2 additional sessions that are one talking about building a winning coalition. Now, Maria's going to go into this in a lot more detail, but when we say coalition, we don't necessarily mean with other candidates, we mean coalitions with voters. So I just want to lay that out here now, and then she can break that down even further. And then we're going to go into some campaign brass tacks, just very basics, kind of campaign 101, but with ranked choice voting infused into that dialogue. Then tomorrow, we're going to come back bright and early, and we're going to talk about messaging. We're going to talk about how this is going to impact the way that your campaign communicates with the public. And then in a really, really exciting panel with some folks who have firsthand knowledge of how to run these campaigns. So we look forward to having you with us this whole time. We hope you can stick with us. If not, we have plenty to offer today. And if other folks are only coming tomorrow, they're not missing out. Now, we have a ton of folks on here, which is great. It is so exciting to have so many people join us. So it's going to be pretty difficult with the limited time that we have to run through and do introductions with everybody. So what we're going to ask you to do, and this may be a little bit difficult for some, but we'll have somebody from the Fair Vote Minnesota team put some instructions in the chat. We're going to have everybody make sure that they've updated their name on their Zoom screen, right? So that your name that's popping up. So if you hover over mine, it should say Grace Ramsey Democracy Rising, because that's my organization. And so what we'd love for you to do is to take a minute. I'll go ahead and mute and give you guys a little bit of time, and update your name with your name. It can be first name and last name if you want, or just your first name, and then what campaign you're running. So maybe it's Maria and she's running for Santa Fe City Council, whatever that may be, whatever race you're running for. So your first name and the campaign that you're working on. If you're the candidate, that's great. We'll definitely know it's you. And if not, you can say which campaign you're working with, whether you're a volunteer, whether you're staff, whatever capacity you're joining us in today. So I'm going to give about a minute where I'll mute myself and not bother you anymore, and then we will proceed with the training. All right, we'll give it about 30 more seconds and then we're going to dive in. We're sacrificing a little bit of participatory time here so that we maximize participatory time in our exercises and breakout sessions. So I promise this is worth it in the end. All right. Hopefully I can't quite see everybody, but I'm seeing some names all sorted out. So we will keep going and we're going to move on to the first section of our training. And this section, we'll be talking about what is ranked choice voting. And I'm going to quickly turn it over to Jean again to talk a little bit about how ranked choice voting has worked so far in Minnesota.
Thank you, Grace. I think what I'll do is just start with making sure everyone understands the change that happened, moving from what was and now what we have with ranked choice voting in all of the cities. This is true for Minneapolis, St. Paul, St. Louis Park, Bloomington, and Minnetonka. The change has all been the same. What the cities have done and what the voters have done, the voters have all voted to put this in place in each of the cities, with the exception of St. Louis Park, which was adopted by a measure of the city council, is that it was a change of eliminating the low turnout primary that was very unrepresentative of the community at large. Primaries typically turn out about 5% of voters. Sometimes that would be in a good year. And with ranked choice voting, we don't need to take that step in the process because it simply wasn't working in the community. So the change that was made was to eliminate, with ranked choice voting in nonpartisan races, which all the communities have, is to consolidate 2 steps into one and conducting what we call an instant runoff and ensuring candidates emerge with a majority of the vote, but in a single cost-effective, higher turnout, and much, much more representative election in November. That's one of the biggest benefits of this change to ranked choice voting. So while it has many components to make it inclusive and participatory, simply eliminating that low turnout primary has been a huge step in opening the process to new campaigns, new people, new ideas, and not disqualifying people based on that low turnout and unrepresentative primary. So with that change, what we have seen by moving all these elections into one general election in November are quite a few advantages. Grace, can you move to the next slide, please? First, we increased participation instantaneously by getting rid of that low turnout step in the process. But beyond just increasing effective participation, we have seen a consistent and steady increase in voter turnout. And one of the key reasons for that is because campaigns have become much more robust. This year, both in Bloomington and Minneapolis so far, we are seeing a number of races with many campaigns, many candidates, highly competitive, and that level of competitiveness drives a very robust conversation in the community about the future of what our wards, what our cities want to look like. And voters engage in that process. There are more candidates engaged in each of the candidate forums, bringing more voters into the process. The media pays attention more to competitive campaigns and just lifts the whole conversation, driving awareness and driving turnout at the end of the day. So we're seeing increased participation, which is what we like to see in our democracy, of course. Another big change that we have seen in the process since using it starting in 2009 is a much more civil tone to all of the campaigns. It's one of the first things we noticed, actually, is just how much more civil the campaigns are. That doesn't mean there aren't differences. That's what campaigns are all about, is to express those differences, make sure people understand why you're better than somebody else in terms of policy issues. But it eliminates, in great part, the ad hominem attacks that we used to often see in our campaigns. And candidates stay focused on the issues and have the opportunity to do that. And candidates tell us that's a really refreshing way to campaign. And we hope that that's your experience as well. And then thirdly, we have seen a much more inclusive and diverse set of candidates running. People of color, more women, and not only do we see more diversity as candidates, we see more diversity in the results. The more people of color, the more women, the more diverse political perspectives that are on the table, they all now get more expressed in the results as well. So we're seeing much more diversity in who gets elected, again, which is what we like to see in our democracy. So we are hopeful in this big year 2021 that we will see that kind of example playing out once again. More robust campaigns, more participation, more diversity. Again, not just of who's running, but of political perspectives that are running, increasing awareness for voters and increasing their engagement. Grace, can you go to the next slide, please? And with all of that, we know that ranked choice voting is truly working. Most importantly, what we know from polling voters, and we have polled voters in all of the cities that have used ranked choice voting to date, asking what their experience is and polling candidates as well. And voters tell us three key things. One, it's very easy to use. It's not hard to rank your ballots. Now, we can't surprise voters at the polls. We want to make sure they know that they have an opportunity to rank, and that we let them know that the more they rank, the more power their ballot has. So we'll be encouraging that ranking process. Ranking candidates is how you vote into elections. As a candidate, you'll be seeking second and third choices. That's how you campaign for 2 elections in 1. So we want to make sure voters rank. And what we know is that 92% of voters frequently tell us that that process is easy to do, and almost 90% of the voters rank their ballot. So we know that works. Voters not just find it easy to use, they prefer it over the old system. It gets rid of a primary most people never attended in the first place. They find ranking empowering to them as a voter. It gives them more choice, more voice in the process. And at the end of the day, they get to express themselves the way they truly want to. So they prefer it over the old system, and they want to expand it statewide or in other elections, like for school board in these communities, which it is not available for use yet. So whenever voters have an opportunity to use it, they love it. And candidates tell us that it's a more effective way to campaign because candidates get to talk to more voters and engage more voters in the process. Grace, the next slide.
All right, thank you, Jean.
That's it.
I will take it from here. So we're going to use a mock election as an example to run through this. And we're actually going to use these candidates throughout the training. So you got a packet yesterday in your email or today, and it had a few documents. The one that you would want to look at here would be Ward X candidates. So we're going to be running a mock election in Ward X. We have 4 candidates running. And for voters, this is what your ballot is going to look like. The font may not be quite as cool as we made it, but this is what you're looking at. So you see on the left is your first choice, in the center is your second choice, and on the right is your third choice. So the way that I like to think about this when I'm talking to voters or when I'm voting in a ranked choice voting election is my first choice is the candidate I love. Maybe I donated to their campaign. Maybe I knocked on doors for them, but I really am invested in their candidacy and I want them to win. My second choice is the candidate I like. Let's say for some reason my first choice candidate had to drop out of the race for one reason or another, and all of a sudden they couldn't be a choice for me anymore. My second choice is who's the next best candidate for me that works with the issues that I vote on. And then your third choice, we sometimes say, is the candidate you can stand, right? You want to make sure that you're still weighing in on the outcome of this election. So you have those 3 choices to use. Now, if you were out there talking to a voter, this is pretty much the conversation you need to have. We're going to go a little bit more in depth today in this training because I think as candidates and as campaign staff or volunteers, it's good to go beyond this and to have that information. But if you're talking to a voter, they mostly just need to know what their ballot's going to look like and how they should be interacting with it. So because we're going a little bit more in depth, now we're going to run our mock election and see how it works. So all of us cast our ballots on election day, and we're going to go into election night and see how we count the votes. So the key difference between ranked choice voting and other elections is that a candidate needs to get at least 50% plus 1 to be elected. You see that very dark line I put up there for you. I tried to make it as big as possible. So when we're counting the votes in a ranked choice voting election, we start by only looking at voters' first choices, right? So you only are with your favorite candidate right now, and that's all you need to think about. But Maria, if you can help me out, I might have a few questions for you as we go through this. We can see Dahlquist, who, if you look at those candidate bios, is our incumbent candidate, has about 36%. Maria, is that a majority?
It is not.
It is not a majority. 36% means 64% of the voters, I looked it up, in this election preferred another candidate as their first choice. So Maria, in a ranked choice voting election, what do I do now? How do I find my winner?
Well, if we don't have a candidate reaching a majority, right, on the first count, then we eliminate the candidate with the least number of first choice votes.
And who is that in my mock election?
That would be Abdi.
All right. She's a wonderful candidate. We've loved to see her candidacy. First time candidate out there, but unfortunately just not enough support to win. So we're going to move on to our second round. So that candidate who had the least votes is eliminated. And the voters who voted for that person as their first choice. So let's say I voted for Abdi as my first choice. I'd have my vote instantly go to my second choice, right? So it's that backup choice. So when I couldn't have the candidate I truly supported, my vote went to the next choice on my ballot. So we look again, right? We checked by that same measure we did the first time. Has a candidate reached that 50% threshold? Maria, help me out. Has anybody reached that threshold?
Nobody has, but it's interesting that Romero is catching up to Dalquist. The race is heating up.
Neck and neck right now. So what should I do? How do we go to the next round, Maria?
So we do the same thing. We eliminate the candidate with the least number of votes at this point, which in this case would be Williams.
All right, we'll move right along. So we eliminated that candidate. We're down to just 2 candidates now. And we've seen that 54% of voters are with Romero and put her over the line to be elected in our mock election, right? So we started out with a candidate with 36%, not a majority. And then we saw the consensus in Ward X built around Romero. So we have our winner. So this is a mock election. This is a hypothetical scenario, but let's see how this would work in real life, right? Dealing in hypotheticals only tells us so much. So let's look at what happened we're going to look at Ward 4, and this is in 2017. So similar situation, we have 4 candidates. So we have Barb Johnson, who was a 4-year incumbent. We have Philippe Cunningham and Stephanie Gasca, who are both more progressive candidates on the younger side entering this race, both more involved in the organizing community. And then we also have Dana Hansen, who is a slightly late entry into the race, who was running as a libertarian. Now, we're all going to cast our votes in this election as the voters did. One thing that's important to note is about 2 weeks before this election, Philippe Cunningham and Stephanie Gasca announced that they would be supporting the other as their second choice on their ballot. So they made that announcement. We go into the results. So we can see we have, I added it up so no one else has to, we have about 4,929 voters. So if we need to get 50% plus 1, where we would put that big bar like we did on the other graphs, it would be at 2,465 votes. So Maria, looking at this chart, has anybody reached that number?
No, but Barb is getting pretty close.
Pretty close, but not quite there, right? Just a few hundred votes shy of where she needs to be, but we have a lot of other votes that are spread out. So like we did in our mock election, we're going to eliminate the candidate with the fewest votes. Now, a way that these elections can be made more efficient, right? We could do this all one by one, but we can go a little bit faster with some of the information that we have here. So we see there are 11 write-ins, there are 220 votes for Dana Hansen, and there are 634 votes for Stephanie. Now, an interesting thing is if we add up all of those, let's say all of the write-in voters and all of the Hansen voters rank Stephanie as their second choice. Unfortunately, that's not enough votes to catch her up to the 2 frontrunners. So we actually can eliminate all 3, and all of those voters would have their vote go to their second choice. So we'll see how that looks, right? So we do the second round of counting. We remember that we have to get to that threshold. It was 2,465. Maria, do we have a winner?
We have a winner. Philippe came in from second place and overtook Barb on the second round.
So an interesting thing here, down at the bottom, you can see exhausted and 228. So this is an interesting thing to think about as candidates, right? So what that means is those voters ranked as first choice, but when that first choice candidate was eliminated, they had not ranked a second choice. Now, it is not my place to judge the choices that a voter makes. But one thing as a candidate, you want to make sure is that those are votes that were left on the table, right? If you were one of these other 2 candidates and you really wanted to make sure that you could get that support in your camp, those were 228 votes that were left on the table. And you want to make sure that people are aware that they can rank their choices. So we're going to hopefully assume that everybody here just said, hey, I have my first choice and nobody else. That is my opinion. And we can't force voters to rank candidates that they don't want to, right? If you want to rank one candidate and leave the rest of your ballot, that's your right. But as a candidate, you want to see that there are opportunities to earn those second choice votes and to bring them into your camp. So that's our real life example. Now, a couple housekeeping things. So when can we expect election results? So in past years, it's taken a couple days. I remember way back in 2013, there was the party at City Hall where they were displaying the results on the wall there. As fun as that was, we have some technological efficiencies, which are very exciting. So for races where somebody wins with a majority, you will know on election night that party is going to be incredible. You're going to have the best time. But for others, the races that would go into that ranked choice voting count where we don't have a winner on election night, you will know the results the next day. So we're thinking about ascending levels of greatness in your parties, right? You can have that, wow, we all worked a 20-hour day on election night, and then the next night you can say, and oh my God, it was worth it, right? So that's how we can think about it this year. One other housekeeping thing, if you're running for the at-large seats on the park board or the Board of Education, there's a couple where there's at-large seats where there's more people, more than one person running for at the same time for the same seat. So 3 at-large seats on the park board. So some things to remember there. For the voters, the process is exactly the same. Voters are ranking candidates in order of choice, but the counting process is slightly different. So when we're electing multiple people, that threshold, the number of votes to win, goes down a little bit, and it actually gives us a proportional outcome. Now, we're going to do a separate session for those folks because that's slightly different, but most of the principles that we're going to discuss here are exactly the same for those races. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear, and we got you at-large folks. We will be talking to you soon. So when you're going out in the world and doing all of your campaign activities, there's a couple things we want to make sure that you're aware of. Voter education is a team effort, right? So you are a component of it, but so are, community organizations like Fair Vote Minnesota and other organizations who are going to be doing engagement work. The city will be doing its best, whatever city you're living in, to get information to voters. So you aren't alone, but we can't assume that every voter is going to know exactly what ranked choice is and how their ballot's going to work. So we're all working on this together. And I want to encourage you, when you run into those moments where you want to make sure that your voter education is crystal clear and voters are getting everything that they need to you, I want you to feel like you can lean on those organizations that are doing that voter education. Maybe there is a campaign event coming up where you're really talking to voters, but they may be voters you're not as familiar with. And you really want to make sure that even if they're coming and they support another candidate, that they know that they can rank you second, or they know how their ballot's going to work. Maybe there's a candidate forum coming up and you really want to make sure that voter education is worked into the beginning of that candidate forum. I want to encourage you to lean on Fair Vote Minnesota and the other organizations that are doing this work. But let's be honest, most voters are going to learn about this election from you, the candidates, right? The thing that is most likely to get a voter to go to the polls on election day is hearing from a candidate. And that's the job, right? And the way I like to think about this, and actually a brilliant woman named Heidi gave me a little bit the language for this, and I'd always been thinking it, is campaigning for office is your first act as an elected official, right? It's the first thing that you're going to do before you take office. And so much like any other public information that you need to give out, whether it's public safety, whether it's health related, whatever it may be, the responsibility of an elected official is to give their constituents good information and clear instructions. And so you as candidates, this is your first act. Now, Heidi went as far as to say that giving inaccurate information to voters is political malpractice, which is a little bit farther than I'm willing to go. But I really want you to take that ownership of your role in the voter education process as a candidate. So with that, we are going to prepare to go into our first exercise. And what we're going to have you do is you're going to have a conversation with somebody as though you're canvassing. Let's say you're at a community event, you're going to be on Zoom for this one. So maybe that's good practice for other events, but we're going to pair you off and you're going to go into your breakout room and have a conversation with the other person about ranked choice voting. So we're going to do this 3 times. You're going to have 3 minutes in each of these breakouts with one other person. And what you're going to do in that breakout room, you and your partner are each going to take turns asking the other person if they know about ranked choice voting. And then you're going to respond with whatever they say, you're going to roll with it, and you're either going to educate them or you're going to have a quick conversation. So there's 3 different roles, right? So one time you're going to be the educator. That's one role you're going to play. And then the other time you're going to have somebody asking you if you know about ranked choice voting. And we're going to have everybody divide up so that we get some different responses in our different conversations. So if your last name starts with the letter A through J, we're going to have you be a 1. And what it means to be a 1, when somebody asks you if you know about ranked choice voting, you're going to say, yes, I know everything there is to know. We're going to leave opinions about the policy out of it, but you're going to say, I know that I'm going to have 3 choices on my ballot. I know that I'm going to rank them in order of choice, all that. You're an expert, you're a whiz. And so that's going to be a pretty easy conversation for the person asking you. And then you can talk about the weather or whatever you'd like. Now, if your last name starts with K through R, you're going to be a 2. So a number 2. If you're a 2, that means you've heard of ranked choice voting. That rings a bell, but you're not totally clear on what ranked choice voting is. Maybe you have some questions. Maybe you want to learn a little bit more from the person talking to you. So if you are the educator and you're talking to a number 2, you're going to say, you're going to go through your wrap. You're going to talk about what they need to know. You're going to try to answer any questions. And if not, you're going to send them, tell them where they can learn more. Now, if you don't know that off the top of your head, don't feel bad. You can make up a website. We're not holding you to anything here, but you're going to answer questions and try to guide them to more resources. And then finally, if your last name starts with S through Z, you're going to be a 3, which means you've never heard of ranked choice voting before, right? So no familiarity, and we're going to take it from the top, and the person that you're talking to is going to work with them. Now, you have a document in the folder we sent out kind of describing this, but I feel like the best way to do this is just to dive into it. So, also, when you're going to rotate from those one-on-ones, you're going to do this 3 times. There may be a little bit of a lag in between. Don't worry. We have a wonderful, wonderful helper with technology, but these things take time. So we ask for a little bit of patience in between. But with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment, and I think we can go to our breakout rooms.
All right, everyone, here we are again. We're going to talk about really getting into the weeds a little bit about what we mean about building a winning coalition. Like Kyle just mentioned, we're talking about a coalition of voters, right? We're not talking about a coalition of candidates. That's a possibility. You can align your platforms to another candidate that has a similar platform than yours. But for the purpose of this conversation right now, we're talking about a coalition of voters. Okay, so the most important thing for your campaign, I'm sure everybody here is aware, is to figure out how many votes you need in order to win. Remember, in a ranked choice voting election, you need 50% of the vote plus 1 vote to cross that winning threshold. So calculating that win number is the most important thing you'll do in your campaign, because it'll set up your whole plan. You will make decisions about how to allocate your resources according to how many votes you actually will need to win. So let's get into that a little bit. In order to calculate that win number, the first thing you need to do is figure out what the expected turnout is for this race that this election that you're running in. So we are trying to determine the expected turnout for our hypothetical Ward X. The way to do this is that you look at the past 3 elections that are similar to the election that you're running in. In other words, if you're running for city council in a year where there's no mayoral election, then you want to look at the past 3 elections where there were city council races without a mayoral race as well. That's what we mean by similar past elections, right? There's other things to consider in terms of similar elections. You also want to look specifically at the voter turnout for the race, specifically the seat that you are running for, right? So in our hypothetical Ward X, there are approximately 25,000 registered voters, okay? And we are expecting about 45% voter turnout. And that again is an average based on those past 3 similar elections. So expected turnout for Ward X in this year is 11,250 voters. There's other things to take into account in terms of voter turnout, right? If there's a really hot race, up ballot or down ballot from you, that might be something that's gonna either increase or decrease voter turnout. If there's a really controversial or polarizing ballot initiative on the ballot this year, that might really increase voter turnout. Current events, there's a lot going on over there in Minnesota right now as far as on the ground, right? This might change voter turnout in one way or another. And also, we are experiencing a lot of changes in voter access laws in different states, right? So like maybe you had a great voter turnout last time, but this time there's new restricted voter access laws that might decrease the turnout. So all of these things you want to keep in mind, but you want to have the best possible guesstimate, very educated guesstimate as to what you think the expected turnout is going to be. So that's step one. Let's move to the next slide, please. All right, so now that we have our expected turnout, which is 11,250 voters for Ward X, we can calculate our win number. So again, for an RCV race, there's a majority threshold, so you'll need 50% plus one, which in this case, you just divide that number by two and add one vote, equals 5,626 votes. This is the number to the one vote, right? That is gonna get you over the threshold. But as a campaign person, do you wanna plan your whole campaign to the exact number of votes that you need to win? Or would you think that it might be a good idea to build in a little buffer? Liz, you feel like a buffer is a good idea? Absolutely, right? You don't want to just like win by the seat of your pants. You want to make sure that you have a little bit of space built in there. So, in campaigns, usually it's recommended that you add 2 to 4% to that win number so that you have that little extra reassurance that you can win the race. We recommend, in the middle there, add 3% to your win number. So 53% of the vote is what we would recommend. So in this case, that brings us up to 5,963 votes. This is what you'll need to win with a little breathing room. Your campaign basically needs to convince little under 6,000 people in Ward X to vote for you so that you can win. Okay, so now that you have your win number, you can plan your whole campaign around that. Let's remember that there are 3 resources that campaigns have. Grace, can you tell me what those are?
Yes, let me unmute. I believe they are time, people, and resources, which kind of means money.
Time, people, and money. And of those, which can you get more of?
People, you can recruit more volunteers or hire more staff, and you can raise more money.
So time is the thing that you really cannot get more of, right? So all of these things we're going to keep in mind as we keep going through these slides. But in an RCV election, once you have that win number, to be a winning candidate, you have to be sure to have a large number of first choice votes. One of our participants talked about this before, right? In a tight race, in a competitive race, you absolutely will need those second and third choice votes, but it is impossible in a ranked choice voting for a candidate without strong first choice vote support to actually win. It's just not, it cannot happen. So you need a strong showing of first choice votes, and then you need to add up to that voter coalition with second choice and third choice votes. You are going to have to talk to those voters, right? Voters that prefer other candidates. And we're going to get a little bit later into how to strategize that. Which one of your opponent's first choice voters do you want to talk to? And how are you going to persuade them to give you their second or third choice vote? Important questions to ask yourself are, how can I maximize my first choice votes, right? You have a group of people that are definitely going to vote for you. How can you make sure that other folks, that you're bringing people into your campaign, into your platform to give you their first choice vote? And other than that, again, how do you talk to people about getting their second and third choice votes? That is very uncomfortable for candidates the first time they do it, but it gets easier and easier as we move along. So let's move on. Okay, I'm going to show this chart to you right now, and immediately after this slide, I'm going to ask you to throw this chart away for the rest of the training and for the rest of your campaign. This is the old way of doing things, right? When you just pick one and basically, this is the candidate I want, and I don't want any other candidate to win. This is the old way of doing it, where you basically have your base of supporters. In this case, we've assigned 40% of the voters are with you, 40% of the voters are with somebody else, and then there's that slight section of the electorate, in this case 20%, that is undecided, right? The old way of doing, as a campaign, you would prioritize talking to that 20% of the electorate, because you're not likely to change anybody's mind who's already voting for your opponent, right? What might be a problem about only campaigning, only talking to 20% of the voters? Grace, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, those 20% are the only people whose issues get brought up to their future elected officials.
Good point. Does anybody else have some thoughts about why it might not be the best to only talk to 20% of the people? I can't really see if anybody's raising your hand, you just blurt it out because I can't see you.
I mean, I guess that, 20% almost could equal the status quo. Mm-hmm. So, you just be supporting the going narrative.
Yep, excellent point.
Anybody Maria?
Else? Yep.
I've got a question from someone in the audience asking about how direct to be in asking for first, second, third choices. Can you address that as well?
We will get to that in just a moment. So let's just put a pin on that for now.
Should we see the new way?
Let's hold on a second. So I just want to say, right, when you're only talking to 20% of the people, that by definition means that you're not talking to 80% of the people. That really includes your own base of supporters. You're basically taking them for granted, right? You're not spending your resources on them. You're not really engaging them unless they're a volunteer or a donor. So it's really, when voters are really learning about you from talking to you and talking to your surrogates, if you're just prioritizing talking to 20% of the people, you're missing an opportunity to really get voters to know you, but this, outside of that, the undecided slice. So let's go to the new way. Okay, so please throw that chart away, that Venn chart that we just talked about, because that's the old way of doing it. In an RCV election, this is a new visual, right? This is the way that I want you all to think about visualizing your campaign and your base. So in a ranked choice voting election, people will rank their number 1, number 2, and number 3 choices. And the idea that you have a base that is yours and belongs to you and it doesn't belong to any of the other candidates just goes away, and vice versa, right? The idea that your opponent has a base that you have no access to whatsoever, that goes away. Basically, a voter can vote for you as their number 1, but then they vote for your opponent as their number 2, right? And likewise, they can vote for your opponent as a number 1, and they'll vote for you as their number 2. So it really, in ranked choice voting, there really is no such thing as an opponent's base, an opponent voter. All voters basically are a possibility that they could have some level of support for you. So visualizing this, basically, let's think about it instead of a Venn diagram, let's think about it as a series of concentric circles. The center circle in this chart is your first choice voters. Those are the people that you absolutely know they're going to vote for you. They've told you so. Maybe a lot of these people are volunteering for you or donating or door knocking or whatever it is. You can count on those folks as your first choice votes. Moving out there, then you have your second choice voters, right? These are people who are supporting somebody else, but you have either committed their second choice vote or there's an opportunity to do so. And then as you move out, lesser level of support, you get to your third choice voters. So all of these voters are on the table for ranked choice voting. Now, are you going to be able to talk to all of these voters? Probably not, and you'll need to strategize around this, but I just want you to shift the way that you're thinking about this, that all these voters are on the table. Okay, so how are you going to get to these folks, right? You need to mobilize your base. When we're talking about your base, we're talking about two different things. First of all, we're talking about your personal base. Your personal base are individuals who you have a personal relationship with. They're folks who you absolutely can count on. They'll volunteer for you, they'll donate, they'll step up to help, they'll, host a house party or whatever it is. Identifying your personal base is about assessing your personal relationships and also your campaign staff's personal relationships, right? So who might be in your personal base?
Your family.
Your family. Who else?
People at church or work.
Yep, your co-workers, people you know from church.
Your neighbors.
Your neighbors, absolutely. Let's just populate that box, Grace.
We did it.
You did it, right? These are folks again, you have a personal relationship with. They're individuals. Outside of that, there is also your base communities that you're going to need to mobilize. And what do we mean by base communities? Base communities are not individuals, right? They are groups of people who could be part of your voter coalition because of where they live, how old they are, what kind of ethnicity they are, the issues that interest them, their values. But we're talking about groups of people, organizations, and such things. So who might be part of a base community?
Social justice groups.
Yep. If you are a social justice leaning candidate, a social justice organization would be one. Excellent. Who else?
Faith communities.
Yep. Who else?
Businesses.
Businesses or business associations, right? Really important. If you're, if you're a realtor, there's like the Realtors Association. If you're, there's all those professional associations that are that can be part of your base community. It's really important to be creative about this because there are lots of groups in every community, right? People like to organize themselves into groups. People like to work together. And if you can really reach out to those base communities, you get a lot of return on your investment, right? But the key thing there is that it's your investment. You're investing, building a relationship, not just with your personal base, but with these base communities. You're showing up to their events. You're stepping up when they need something. You are having conversations. You know what they care about. So you don't claim a base. A base really claims you. And in order for that to happen, you need to show up and be trustworthy for these groups and these individuals. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so there, you have your personal base and you have your base communities. However, there's always a bunch of people who are not engaged in electoral politics for whatever reason it may be, right? In our hypothetical Ward X, if you remember, our expected turnout is around 45%. There's 55% of the voters that are not even showing up to vote, right? That's a huge opportunity to engage people. Why are people not engaged in electoral politics and elections? Why don't people show up to vote? As you are planning your campaign, just really think about who should be part of your first choice coalition, who is not actively engaged as of now, and figure out why. What can you offer them to incentivize them to be part of your campaign? Figure out the best way to bring people into the fold. So there's, elections are, they can be really engaging. There's an opportunity during an election cycle to talk to people. There's a lot of hot issues in a community. Usually there's at least a few hot issues in a community during an election cycle, where people in the community are aware of that issue, they care about that issue, and they just might not be showing up to vote. So how do you connect those things, right? How do you talk to people, let them know that you care about the issue they care about, and therefore they should vote for you? Like that, therefore, is the next step. Elections are also very educational, right? They offer you an opportunity to share information with people and to learn a lot from people. And something that I think is really wonderful about campaigns and election cycles is that campaigns train a lot of volunteers, engage a lot of young people that are coming into the fold. It's really an opportunity to develop leadership for the future, right? Those volunteers today may be running for
Get
office.
ready, kiddos.
What's that? Okay. Elections are also very empowering. They create an opportunity for groups and constituencies that have felt left out of the process to be brought into the fold and to share their voice, to be heard. And wield some power within the community. So as you are trying to get people into the fold, into the political process, try to figure out ways in which you can make people and constituents feel like they are players and they are at the table. And finally, elections really matter. They really create a space for issues that are vital for the community to be discussed front and center. So remember, right, in our Ward X, 55% of the voters are not even showing up. So outside of the voters that you know are going to show up and that you're trying to get those first choice votes from, who is not even engaged that could be engaged, you can really get a lot of votes that way as well.
All right, thank you, Maria. So now we're going to get into some campaign brass tacks. Before we dive into the ranked choice voting part of this, I want to go back to the beginning and just talk about why we build out campaign plans, why planning is essential. The stage of your campaign that you're in now is going to define the rest of your journey. And so how building a strong plan is what's going to get you over the finish line. So why do we plan? We do it to create a roadmap to victory. Anytime I'm planning out any kind of project, I start with what I want the end to be, what success looks like to me. For a candidate, that's going to be winning your election, right? But it helps you work backwards and decide what you're going to need. It creates the structures that are necessary to win. It builds consensus among your team. I know it can be awfully hard to have a lot of these discussions of who's in charge of what. I've definitely been a part of the field versus comms wars that most campaigns go through. I'm on the field side of it. So how do you build consensus among the team? How do you agree with the strategy that's going to move you forward? You have to get everybody on the same page and have the same goal. Going back to those resources that we have, right? You have time, you have people, you have money. How are you going to use them? We know time is the most precious, but when are you going to, really get after fundraising versus when are you going to hire staff? All of this is defined in your plan so that you know you can measure yourself against your plan. Are you being successful? What needs to change? How do we build out these teams to make us more effective? Establishes credibility. People like to bet on winners, and having a plan and showing that you've done the really hard thinking of how you built out your campaign shows people that you plan to win. You're more likely to get support from voters. You're more likely to get support from people who could fund your campaign. You're more likely to get support from endorsing organizations. Showing your plan to win gets other people bought into your vision. And then finally, helps maintain focus. particularly in a crisis, if we're being honest, right? The best campaigns, the ones that can weather a storm, the ones that can have bad days, are proactive, not reactive, which means we have planned for this in the event. If we know that our campaign has decided this weekend we need to knock 600 doors, and we know that we have a big canvas scheduled for Saturday, and then the forecast says it's going to rain, because that always happens when you have a big Saturday canvas, we know to reschedule those folks for Sunday when it's going to be sunny. We know that we need to really make sure we're doing that, right? It maintains our focus. There are no crises when you've planned for every event. So let's talk about how ranked choice voting is going to work. Now, budgeting for campaigns is different for every campaign, so we're not going to speak to everybody's experience, but we are going to talk about how you're going to maximize things and some efficiencies that are offered when you're thinking about ranked choice voting. So you're going to have to spend money potentially differently, or at least think about money a little bit differently when you're budgeting for your campaign. So let's think of some ways that ranked choice voting is going to do this. How are you going to maximize those resources? So some experiences we've seen in other places, and these are tips based on that. 1, you are going to prioritize field and voter contact. I do not say that just as a field person who thinks we never get enough love. I say that because when voters have those 3 choices on their ballot, and voter education is that important for your campaign to build out your winning coalition of voters, having a face-to-face conversation or a live conversation with a voter gets you a lot more bang for your buck. The return on investment goes up. Because in other situations where maybe you could just run a TV ad, or maybe you could just send a mailer, in ranked choice voting, when you knock on a door with a voter, even if you don't get that voter to rank you as a first choice, you may get their second or third. And so that's a lot easier in person than through other means of campaign communications. Second, getting after endorsements in every way that you can. So there are going to be endorsing organizations that are up to speed and know that they have those rankings on their ballot. I would encourage you, if an organization makes an endorsement and it's not ranked, to make the case for why you should be their second choice. That means you're on any literature that they're putting out. If they're running any kind of IE, you will be a part of that. Whatever their endorsement brings with it, if they rank it and you can get in that ranking, you are then included in that. Now, sometimes you will have to kind of make sure that you're towing the line. If you have a second choice endorsement, you can't just say, hey, this organization endorsed me. You have to say, I am their second choice candidate. But either way, in the communications that they're having, they may not have vouched for you as their first choice, but you are in their ranking. You are an acceptable candidate who they think could improve things in your jurisdiction. So bearing that in mind. Now, finally, this one's not going to be for everybody, and I understand that. But something to consider is if you are closely aligned with a candidate, maybe on a particular issue, maybe just generally, joint campaigning in whatever form that may take, maybe a joint lit piece, maybe a joint canvas, whatever it may be, but joint coalition campaigning can save you money because it maximizes your exposure in that person's campaign. So if you're thinking about it, if there's a candidate where you're like, if it's not me, I need it to be them because their vision aligns with mine. Think about what it means if you say, okay, I would rank you as my second choice, and you say that at a candidate forum, right? They would do the same for you. So their voters know what to do with their ballot, or at least they're signaling. No guarantees there, but it maximizes the potential there. So those are a few efficiencies if you're thinking about ways to spend your money that can help you move a little bit quicker, get in front of more people, and maximize your chances of being ranked on as many people's ballots as possible.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about opposition research, as it's called in the old way of doing things, right? In a ranked choice voting race, you want to do that research, but the reasons why are significantly different. You want to have really good information about your opponents because you are going to need to learn how to talk about your opponents, right? You want to have really good factual comparative research on a couple of things. One is what are the platforms of your opponents? Where do they stand on the issues? If they've held elected office before, what have their votes been like, right? But remember, this is not so that you can trash talk them or attack them. This is so that you can figure out where there are similarities that you can leverage and where there are differences where you could stand out. The other thing that you want to figure out, next bullet, please, is how does the field in general align on your issues? Let's say that I'm a candidate running in my ward, and my main issue is affordable housing, right? I want to know where everybody else on that ballot, on that ticket, is where their stand is on affordable housing. Can I align with some of them? Can I distinguish myself from some of them? If this is my main issue, I really want to know. Next, please. And again, where can you find common ground, right? There's candidates in some races where there's like 2 or 3 candidates that have really similar platforms. You can easily align with those folks. But let's say that there's a candidate that is significantly different from you in terms of their values, in terms of their political leanings. You might still be able to get those voters who prefer that candidate their second choice vote if there is something, an issue that you align with that candidate on. Maybe you both have worked on expanding green space in your city or bike trails or whatever it may be. There might be an opportunity for you to align with people and ask for that second choice vote, even if your platforms are significantly different. But you need to have the research. You need to have good factual information about this. Okay, so once you have this information, right, a little bit different than OPPO research in like the old way of doing things, you have this wealth of information in your pocket. A really important thing that you're going to do with that information is try to figure out who is going to be eliminated and in what order in your race. Why do you want to do that? Because if you know here, you know, if this is your assessment and you know that this candidate Sullivan is going to be eliminated first, you may want to be prepared for that, right? You may want to prioritize talking to her number 1 choice voters to get their second choice. So this is part of your strategy that you've never had to think about in the old way of doing elections. You have to really power map the race, right? Who is going to be eliminated first? Who is going to be eliminated second? How can I get those voters second and third choice votes? Then another thing that you'll want to do with that research is figure out how your opponent's first choice voters feel about your candidacy, right? This has to do with their issues. If they love another candidate, why do they love that candidate, and how can you align with that? Can you align with that? Where do you align and where do you differ? And back to those concentric circles, right? Ideally, you will be talking to every single person in that chart with a first choice, second choice, and third choice. If we had all the resources ever, right? People, money, and time, you would talk to everyone in a ranked choice voting race. That would be wonderful. But let's be honest. Nobody has all the resources in the world. Time particularly is very limited in a campaign, and money and people are not that easy to come by anyways, right? So you really are going to have to prioritize who you're going to talk to. So you will want to target voters. The way that I would encourage you to think about this is place voters in a tier system where the top tier is voters that are very likely to support you and very likely to turn out. You definitely want to get those folks. The tier underneath that might be people who are very likely to support you but may or may not turn out, and so forth, right? And you have those tiers, and then you work your field and your outreach according to those tiers. You prioritize the top tier, and then you move down that list. In an RCV election, targeting should be tiered to prioritize your first choice support and then broaden the universes of likely lower ranking support. So this is the outer circles of that chart that we saw before. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, at least to me. How do you talk to voters? Somebody had a question about this previously, and we're going to get into this a little bit now. And there's going to be a messaging exercise in tomorrow's section of the training that is specific around messaging. But basically, you know, in the old way of doing things, when you go out and talk to voters, you ask your volunteers to, you know, get their clipboard and basically say, I talked to so-and-so, they support me, you know, they support the candidate, they're undecided, or they oppose the candidate, and that's it. In ranked choice voting, that is going to be a lot more nuanced because of that second and third choice opportunity, right? So in a ranked choice voting field operation, I would suggest that your volunteers go out with a clipboard that include these five levels of support. Number one is a voter has a strong support for the candidate, right? They're gonna mark you as your first choice. You can get these folks to volunteer or to get out the vote for you. This is like your super strong base. Number two is leaning support. That means that they think they probably wanna give you their first choice vote, but they're not super sure. Number three is undecided. They just don't know. They may give you their first choice vote, but they may give somebody else their first choice vote. Maybe they haven't thought about it. Maybe they just don't know much about any of the candidates. Number four is leaning towards another candidate, right? So this is the person that says, well, I kind of like somebody else. And in a ranked choice voting election, that's still a vote that you can get, right? And number five, finally, is they support another candidate as their number one choice. So if you look at this, number two, number three, and number four, right? Leaning support, undecided, and leaning towards another candidate, all of these voters you want to have a persuasion conversation with, which is you're going to ask them to rank you as their first choice. And if they're clearly leaning towards somebody else, you're going to ask them to support you as their second choice. So all of these are votes that you can get, and there's just a nuance on how you go about it. And even with number five, if they're support another candidate, that does not mean that they oppose you, right? They're just supporting another candidate. So your task there is to see if you can get a second or third choice from them. And if they just really hate you, then you can, you know, say, thank you so much, have a wonderful day, and they're off your list and you don't need to talk to that person anymore. But those 2, 3s, and 4s, those are votes that you need to really work on getting.
So now we're going to turn it over to Carl with Fair Vote Minnesota to talk a little bit about how your voter database can help guide this strategy and tools that will be available to you.
Yeah, so this part will be pretty quick, but we just want to go over kind of how you can do what Maria just mentioned, tracking your supporters and tracking people who aren't supporting you with the first choice and who they're planning on to choose with the second choice. So basically that means the two big boxes you need to make sure that you're collecting from everybody you talk to is whether or not they're supporting you, leaning towards you, undecided, leaning opposed, strong opposed. That's going to be the same in any campaign you run whatsoever. You're going to have those options. What's different in a ranked choice voting election is we also want to track who they're supporting with the second choice. So for example, maybe someone is supporting, you know, lean opposed to you and says that they're supporting John with the second choice. You would just want to mark lean oppose and then John there, and that way you would see that show up on your data. You could run a search of everybody who is leaned opposed to you and then see who they're supporting with their first choice. You can also mark down, and I would encourage everybody to do this, mark down who is choosing you with their second choice as well. So you can see, all right, who is already committed to making me their second or third choice. This is just going to be really important for you, again, because it'll help you spot trends in the electorate. Obviously, field data isn't a science and should always be taken with a grain of salt. but it's really important to know who your supporters are supporting second, third, whether those are breaking down along any lines or any trends you're noticing. It'll also help you see, maybe there's a candidate who's not super aligned with you, who you're pulling a lot more second choices from. Then maybe you can see why that's happening, or just know maybe there's a big base of people who, for whatever reason, like this one candidate and also like me, I can earn second choices from there. Another thing I would highly advise everyone to make sure is on all of your walk sheets, and is on here over to the left under my name. It'll say who their support is and who they're supporting, whether they're supporting you or not, and how strong that is, and who their second choice is. So this way, if you've already had a conversation with someone, your volunteers will know when they're talking to them that they talked to Carl, he said he was a strong supporter of your campaign, and his second choice is Amy. That'll help you your volunteers be aware, maybe they decide to change their mind in that meantime. You can re-verify that that's still their second choice. And it helps you have a little bit more of a personal relationship with them. It shows that we remembered the previous conversation we had with that voter that voters really like. So obviously there's a number of different databases that campaigns will be using this year. Some, will be with services, like Van or Vote Builder. Some will be that you build yourself. But I would just, again, highly encourage everyone to make sure you're tracking all of this. You don't need to track every tiny little bit in detail, going into tons of minutia. But if you keep it fairly clean and keep a format that looks relatively like this, your volunteers will understand it, and it'll be very easy for you to collect that data and know what to do with it.